Radio Migrante every Sunday night from 9 to 10 p.m. on CHRY 105.5 FM.
And good evening to all the listeners of Radio Migrante on CHRY 105.5 FM, your leading source for diversity. You may also listen to us at www.rdo.to/CHRY, Bell 973, or Rogers Digital Cable 945. And also on your tunein.com on your smartphones if you have it. So, tonight, your guests for this evening is yours truly, Rhea Gamana, and of course, Ish Cabanya. Hello, Ish.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning. Good evening to our listeners from the Philippines, from the US, from Canada, and all around the world. And we have an interesting topic for tonight. As you may have heard about the Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda in the Philippines, which there has been more than 100 days since that happened and destroyed most parts of Eastern Visayas. So there are numerous sentiments of fellow Filipinos in the region, and complaints have been given to the President of the Government of the Philippines, President Benigno Simeon Aquino, for not providing enough assistance. And despite the outpouring of humanitarian aid around the world, there is not enough of the relief, rehabilitation, and reconstruction efforts. And on top of that is the ongoing case of the PDAF or PDAF, Priority Development Assistance Fund, or more popularly known as pork barrel. So there is an interconnection on these issues about corruption and about the capacity of the government to give recovery efforts to the victims of the disasters, not just Haiyan, I guess, but also with the other disasters that occurred in the past year. So tonight, we have retired United Church of Canada Minister Bob McLean, who went to the Philippines and would talk more about his experiences and observations on the response of the government. And he will be speaking about that later on the show. But first, we've also announced contests, but we haven't spoken about the question yet. Just listen and tune in during the discussions. So we'll just tell you more about that later on. Those are free tickets to Bayan Bayanan sa Toronto. And this is only for the Toronto-based listeners. Yeah, so moving on, I guess we'll go on the news.
Yes, go ahead, Ish, if you don't mind reading the news.
Okay, so corpses are still being found in Philippine typhoon zone. This is from abs-cbnnews.com. Bodies are still being found under the wreckage of almost 4 months after Super Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda ravaged the Philippines as survivors struggle to rebuild their lives, officials said Thursday. The government's confirmed death toll of 6,201 has not been updated for a month as officials investigate whether the recently discovered corpses are among the 1,785 listed as missing. UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs Valerie Amos recounted the shock of discovering the dead during a visit Wednesday last week to the devastated central city of Tacloban. She reports, in quotes, "As the debris is cleared, they are finding more dead bodies. We experienced that for ourselves," unquote. Amos visited Tacloban to inspect the progress of the UN-aided rehabilitation effort and check on the condition of survivors of one of the strongest typhoons ever to hit land. The government's National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council spokesperson Reynaldo Balido said, in quotes, "Sometimes they find 2 or 3 a day, then there are days when they find none," referring to the dead bodies. The latest casualty figures were a month old and did not reflect any subsequent corpse retrievals as the authorities work to reconcile the numbers, he added. Haiyan raked across the central Philippines on November 8 last year, wrecking 1.1 million houses and displacing more than 4 million residents of some of the country's poorest provinces, according to the UN. The worst damage was inflicted by huge tsunami-like surges of seawater into Tacloban and other coastal communities. Amos said Tacloban survivors need more help. She said, in quotes, "There are more people trying to live in the original ruined homes. They put up a tarpaulin as a roof and put some wood on the side, and that's not good enough. It won't stand up to a storm. The UN was also concerned about the welfare of more than 1 million farmers after 30 million coconut trees were destroyed, she said. Replacement trees will not bear fruit for another 6 to 8 years. About 30,000 small fishing boats were also destroyed or damaged, she added. To help these people, the UN asked aid donors for $788 million in December, but Amos said only just over $362 million has been raised.
And that news is actually a great segue to what we'll be talking about with United Church of Canada retired minister Bob McLean as he went back to the Philippines on January of this year. So we will get to know more about how he got involved with social justice issues and his observations and analysis to the issues in the Philippines, particularly with the pork barrel system and the Typhoon Yolanda situation that hit mostly the Eastern Visayas region. So we will play, actually, it's not a PSA, but it's kind of like a greeting from one of our listeners. And then you are listening to Radyo Migrante on CHRY 105.5 FM, your leading source for diversity. So here it is.
Magandang gabi po sa ating lahat. Ako po si Esther Lisa Draman. Volunteer po sa Caregiver Action Center. Nakabase po dito sa Toronto. Iniimbitahan po kayong lahat na umattend sa naka-schedule na tax clinic. Ito po ay libre para sa mga workers, dayuhan dito sa Toronto, nagtatrabaho na nag-earn ng below 30,000 a year para po matulungan sila na makompute ang kanilang income tax return. So, libre po ito. Ito po ay magaganap sa St. Pascal Bailon Catholic Church, 92 Steeles Avenue West, sa March 29 from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock p.m. At meron pong karagdagan na activity. Ito po ay free legal clinic. Isa rin pong libreng serbisyo para sa mga nangangailangan ng advice from our lawyers from Parkdale Community Legal Services and Vecina Law Office, as well as Carranza Barristers and Solicitors. So ito po ay inorganize ng Caregiver Action Center, Filipino Support Group, at iba pang mga supporters. So, inaasahan ko na lahat ng nangangailangan ng serbisyong ito darating po sa March 29 from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Salamat po.
Yeah.
This is CHRY 105.5.
Yeah.
And you're listening once again to Radyo Migrante on CHRY 105.5 FM, your leading source for diversity. And you may also listen to us at www.rdo.to/CHRY, Bell 5973, Rogers Digital Cable 945, and on tunein.com if you have smartphones with you. So, we're back. Just for the listeners who just tuned in, we will be talking about how does Typhoon Yolanda situation connected to the pork barrel issue or the pork barrel scandal that has been going on in the Philippines for a long period of time. So, ladies and gentlemen, live here in the studio is retired United Church of Canada minister Bob McLean. Good evening, Reverend Bob, or shall I say Bob?
Yes, please do. Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Yes, thank you. So, while we were chatting a while ago before we started the show, you told us you've been in the Philippines 3 times for the last 7 years, right?
That's right.
So, can you please tell our listeners about it?
Well, my wife and I, Dorothy and I, got involved with the Philippines because our daughter and son-in-law went there to be teachers. So, we visited them on 3 occasions. The first time we arrived, and my daughter was in labor with our first grandson. So that was very exciting. The second time was somewhat different. It was at Christmas time. And we got involved with a group in the Cordillera region that was investigating the impact of large-scale mining on indigenous communities and on the environment. That was a very intense 10 days. And that brought me in touch with people and organizations working with them. And I had an extended stay. Personally, I arranged it for 2 months after that. So it was an exciting time for me, a challenging time, and I learned a lot, I think. And then this past time, we reconnected when we went back at Christmas with our family, now 2 grandsons. We went back and reconnected up north with friends and contacts that we had made before. So, that's kind of how come I'm involved with the Philippines.
So from that, a little bit of, the history that you told our listeners, let's go to the bigger picture. You went to the Philippines recently on January this year.
December,
I'm sorry. Yeah. December. You and with your wife, and you visited Visayas, particularly in Cebu.
We were down there just for 3 days. That's right.
Yes.
But we spent most of our time in Makati and up north.
Mm-hmm. So you were also able to pretty much see what has been going on within the Visayas region, because remember the Visayas region was hit with earthquake, and then next after that was the Typhoon Haiyan situation.
Right. Okay. Well, of course, the typhoon hit in early November, so my first impressions were like all of us around the world of how devastating a typhoon, by far the largest typhoon in the Philippines ever recorded. So by the time we got there a month later, it had taken place, and it was into just the whole challenge of responding to that. I have to say that I was not, even though I was down in Cebu, we were there actually with my family, had arranged to go to a resort. Mm-hmm. And so my own experience of the direct impact, I don't have any direct experience. However, one of the things you have to appreciate, a disaster of this scale affects the whole country of the Philippines. So people I did talk to had friends or relatives who were directly impacted. Their homes had been destroyed. In some cases, relatives had died. And it impacts the whole country economically. I'm involved in a small fundraising project in Abra up north, and that's been stalled because the people they rely on for funding are giving their money to typhoon relief, and so you have to appreciate the scale of this is experienced all over. Mm-hmm. What interested me is that this whole tragedy was unfolding right at the time that the pork barreling issue was ramping up in the Philippines, and public protest to that issue was mounting. And I was just curious from my contacts and what I was learning, the connection between the two, of course, this typhoon was on a scale that you have to appreciate any government would have difficulty responding. And I'm not going to judge the Philippines because we responded so poorly in North America to Hurricane Katrina. However, I am interested in the connection because this is quite an alarming issue that is emerging in the Philippines about the full extent of lump sum funds that the president controls. We're talking over 1 trillion pesos, 28 billion Canadian dollars in funds that he controls and disperses to legislators and benefactors and often big business at his discretion. This is where it arises. Mm-hmm. There's been evidence that this way of governing has in fact led to corruption. That in fact there's a major scandal in the Philippines now where it's being reported that 100% of funds allocated to a prominent businesswoman have gone not to projects that were outlined for them to go to, but to benefactors, legislators, herself, and supposed non-government organizations. So it's a very big issue that I think when there's so often when you meet with people, they view the government, they talk about corruption, but this actually helps to explain how it happens. In relation to the typhoon, my concern would be that this whole way of governing with these funds is a very top-down and elitist way of managing funds. And what I think is crucial in an adequate recovery effort, which has a plan attached to it, is that the government not be taking a top-down approach or imposing any sort of plan on the government. There's already indications that what it's imposed has not been adequate, like houses that have been built below standards, and the UN has criticized them for that. But it's...
Yeah, so you think, is it safe to say that the government of the Philippines is not ready for such magnitude of disaster to respond to the needs of the people on the ground?
Well, to be fair, I don't think any government would can be expected to be ready. It would take some time. But there are lots of organizations on the ground who are in touch with the people directly affected.
Yes.
And I think what a lot of community organizations are saying in the Philippines now is that this whole system of pork barreling has to be abolished, and a new system that will allow the government not to provide some top-down approach that could very well end up benefiting people who are already well-to-do, but that there needs to be a collaboration with local organizations, local governments around developing a plan that's going to help to rebuild the whole region.
Yeah,
There's so much that's been affected.
You mentioned already the local organizations, and the title of our show tonight, interestingly, is People Surge, which is the name of the alliance of local organizations from Tacloban, from Samar, and all the rest of the affected areas. But let's step back a little, because the response of the government was to build back better. That's the name of the program. To somehow the program is based on the lessons from previous disasters in the Philippines and other countries. At least that's what the government claims. And the name of this umbrella response is called Reconstruction Assistance on Yolanda, or RAY, and it includes partnerships with private organizations. What's your take on this, since you said that the government does not have the capacity to respond to such?
Well, obviously the response has in a disaster of this scale has to come from different sources. No government in and of itself can be expected to respond adequately, and of course there's been widespread initial response to this. One of my concerns is we don't hear about this in our media here in Canada. A disaster of this scale, why aren't we hearing about it? Because people are usually very generous with their initial response, but there needs to be a sustaining plan. And but my concern is that there's been a historic what we're seeing in the pork barreling thing. This is something that is long-standing and historic in terms of government in the Philippines' relationship to elites, to big business, and if they're starting out with a plan that calls for government big business cooperation without consultation with the victims and the people who work with them on the ground in terms of what the real needs are, it shouldn't be surprising that we're getting things like bulk houses built that are built below standard, things like that. Now, they've been called on that, and we should expect some change so that they'll. But they're also moving. There's a plan to move people out of areas that are close to the sea. It raises the question of what's going to happen to those lands when people are moved out. Are people being adequately consulted? People own a lot of people own their own lands. What compensation will they get? Where will they? Do they have a choice in terms of where they're going to go? Is the government really sensitive to particular needs of the people? And what's going to be in their place? Like, if they have this close alliance with big business, what are the big business interests in terms of moving in to land that's been vacated because it's not safe for the sort of houses that have been built there in the past? It raises some question, and I'm careful not to be stand off at a distance and be critical here, but it's just you have a whole history of how governance has happened in the Philippines that raises questions about the readiness of the government to respond effectively in this disaster.
And you wrote a paper on this, right?
Yes. From what I'd learned from the context, I did write a paper trying to draw the connections.
And you mentioned somehow the connection of the role of the United States in the influence or the influence on the governments of the Philippines.
Well, of course, as I think it's widely known, the United States has been quite influential. After the defeat of the Spanish, the Americans did move in. The Philippines, for the first half of the 20th century, was virtually a colony of the United States. The United States was activist in its own economic and military interests in developing infrastructure in the Philippines, developing an education system. It contrasts interestingly with the approach of the Spanish. But the Americans did nothing to meddle with that kind of top-down control that has been exerted in the Philippines of political leaders with wealthy elites. That has not changed at all.
And how do we connect this with the elite top-down current governance through the pork barrel system? Was it mentioned also in your paper?
Well, yeah, I was trying to focus on this issue of if you mentioned
or maybe we can connect also the economic with what we are talking about right now, the economic and the environmental destruction.
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier, the way I connect that is with the mining issue. The Philippine Mining Act of 1995 came at a time when they were encouraging foreign investment to come in. So that act has been the subject of controversy and protest ever since. It allows foreign companies like our own Canadian mining companies to come in and extract not only the resources but 100% of the profits. There are other perks. They can have their own private militia that will be trained and equipped by the Philippine National Army. That's an example of government operating not in the interests of local people, but in the interests of elite organizations like big business, our own mining companies. And so I'm just saying that that's kind of the experience. So unless there's some real change in the way in which government happens in the Philippines, I'm just doubtful as to whether you can expect a grounded and well-planned response to a major disaster.
And considering what we have been seeing, at least in the social media, not in mainstream media, the upsurge of the people surge.
Right.
Is it safe to say that it's a hint of the alternative, sustainable way of addressing these problems?
Oh, sure, because that organization is calling into question the whole government's approach to the disaster. And so now I only got information on that in the last 3 weeks. So it's since I've come back to Canada, I've heard that their people's organizations are mounting a real challenge to the way in which the government's looks like it's coming into to plan for the recovery. So, but at the same time, there's widespread protest to this pork barreling issue, which is a systemic, long time running indication of how the government goes about doing things, and until there's this whole change in that approach, then it's very difficult for community-based organizations to feel, and the people to feel that they're being really listened to, and that their survival concerns are being taken seriously.
So what do you think will be the proper structure, I guess? You know, when you said that people's organizations, or the people's voice, I guess, is kind of like hard to be heard by these elites. So what do you think will be, say, a proper move for these, you know, for people, in order for them to be heard by landlords and these big business elites, you know, who are, I guess, one of the major factors as to why the pork barrel is happening. And I guess with the Typhoon Yolanda, it's pretty much a man-made in if we see it in a different context. So what do you think in your observation?
By man-made, you mean connected to global warming and,
yes,
and the results of that? There seems to be more and more indication that these weather disasters or disturbances that we're experiencing all over here, like when I was in the Philippines, you had a nice storm here. But I can't claim to be an expert on any of this.
Maybe
These are
maybe
really
it's just
big
your
questions.
observation. Yeah. Yeah. So you visited the Philippines 3 times.
3 times, yeah.
Yeah, 3 times.
More
So-
to come.
More to come.
Oh, sure.
So
I haven't said anything about the delightful people I've met with, and
yes,
some of the times we've had. It's been great. I was
Nice.
introduced to the gongs up in the Cordillera and
Okay.
to the courtship dance. Of course, I had to dance it. Got me to plant rice.
Isn't that right?
I've done all sorts of things with some great people.
nice. So maybe, you know, for those 3 months, 3 non-consecutive visits that you did in the Philippines, with the situations that you have been seeing, would you consider continuing on advocating for these issues?
Oh, definitely. Like, in fact, all 3 of us here were part of a consultation yesterday in Toronto on human rights in the Philippines. And out of that day, we've sort of coalesced different organizations into working on an issue and trying to mobilize people who are here. We got a lot of Philippine Canadians in this country, and I think we're really called to be an effective support with them.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So before moving on, we'll just have a break. But also earlier in the show, we mentioned about a contest. For listeners, this is the question for the featured Bayan Bayanan Letters from Home, which is a theatrical production of a modern masterpiece. Who wrote the play? So that's the question. You could just comment on the post in Facebook and tell us the answer. This is a contest for Toronto-based listeners only. This will be shown on the weekend, March 7th, 8th, and 9th, and the winner will get a pair of tickets. Right on the comment section for your answer on the question, who wrote Bayan Bayanan, Letters from Home?
Okay, so we will have a little break. I will play a song titled Ang Lupang Ito, This Land by Gary Granada. And welcome back to Radyo Migrante on CHRY 105.5 FM, your leading source for diversity. So for the listeners who just tuned in, we are currently speaking with retired United Church of Canada minister Reverend Bob McLean. He went back to the Philippines for 3 times. The recent one was in December 2013. And he experienced, with talking to different people with different community groups in the Philippines, particularly in the Eastern Visayas region. And he saw the issue of Typhoon Yolanda, the aftermath of it. How is it connected to the pork barrel issue? And
yeah, so maybe the next question is, what would be the more efficient way for the government, or your own recommendations for the government to be more efficient in responding to such emergency situations?
Yeah. I have my paper that I wrote that you mentioned here, so maybe I should just use part of it in terms of response to that. There are a number of critical voices with organizations that are stating that government is so skewed in favor of the political and economic elites in the Philippines that the whole system of pork barreling needs to be abolished. Now, the Constitution of the Philippines is modeled on the United States Constitution, and it does call for similar checks and balances and a division of powers. But the power of the president and pork barrel subverts those provisions of checks and balances. It promotes self-interested compliance among members of Congress. The national budget process has to be free of the power of this pork barreling in order to be effective in developing a plan for development that is in response to the needs of the people, whether in this disaster or generally speaking in terms of people and the whole problem of poverty in the Philippines. And it should be there should be a clear accounting of what revenues in the budget are there and what are the required expenditures. There is no Freedom of Information Act, so it's often hard to get clear information on the whole budget process and what's happening and how it's happening. So that budget needs to be transparent, and especially to those whose role it is to critique the budget and how money's being spent. So those are some things that have to, I think, happen. But it's the top-down way of governing that we've been approaching is working in the opposite direction of an effective response to Yolanda that we're that organizations are saying is needed. This isn't just me talking here.
Yeah.
This is many
voices,
reputable voices in the Philippines.
I have a question also from social media. One of our listeners from Ottawa asked, where is your paper published, or could people have access to it?
Well, that's a good question, because I kind of wrote this reflective piece just out of, I kept a journal, and as I say, I've had contacts with a number of organizations, and I'm aware of the response that's developing. I would say, yes, I would like to disseminate it, but at this point, I need help from people in how to do that.
Okay. So maybe we could hook you up with some publishers or newspapers or magazines, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
of course, through my own United Church of Canada network, there are ways in which I could certainly do that. But Yeah.
So,
Any other organizations also that you are involved in right now locally here in Toronto that is doing solidarity work with marginalized people in general?
Well, I am involved in our local community here in Jane and Finch, and so we have a community action planning group that I'm part of. We're coming up with a public meeting on public transit, which is a huge problem here up on Finch Avenue West. I tend to have had a background in social justice issues since I started my ministry in the industrial north end of Hamilton.
so we're almost heading out to the end of the show. Any final message, or actually maybe just a little bit, how important it is for non-Filipinos to be in solidarity with issues like this, and any final message?
Well, I can't speak for everybody, but I definitely we need both Filipino and non-Filipino Canadians informed on what the issues are here. To me personally, it's about it's a saying of Jesus. He said, "I've come that they might have life and have it abundantly." And that message to me is at heart a message about social justice, and I think it's something that should resonate with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to live the abundant life? It means, to me, it should bring you into solidarity with those who are asking for, who are struggling for justice.
Mm-hmm. Some thought-provoking messages and lines from you, Bob. Thank you so much for gracing us here in the studio today.
Thank you so
tonight.
much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity for speaking with us here at Radyo Migrante. So, mabuhay. Yes, thank you. Okay.
I'm Yamanak.
Oh, I'm not Ilocano, so I'm not sure what that means.
Thanks.
There you go. So, we're heading to the end of the show. Let's greet Hannah and the rest of the I workers. So, yun. Sana nakikinig kayo ngayon sa Radyo Migrante. Go ahead, Ish.
So, our announcement, Sagip Migrante is still calling for donations and volunteers since we spoke about the disaster response of people's organizations. So, in the spirit of Bayanihan, Migrante International and Migrante Party List are calling on its chapters and members and OFW aid of families affected by recent disasters. Here in Canada, you have the Sagip Migrante, who's been active for years in support of rescue missions and distribution and delivery of essential goods such as rice, canned goods, and bottled water, setting up of soup kitchens and other relief missions in affected areas. So how to contact them or be a volunteer, you can call 1-800-559-8092, or you can go to the Migrante Canada's website. It's migrante.ca. That's migrante.ca.
And the next one is the consular services in Alberta. So, Salina Salfina, as part of Migrante Alberta's consular services campaign, people are invited to be part of the overwhelming support to have a permanent consular office in Alberta province in Canada. So, to participate, number one, take a selfie with a piece of paper that says, "We need a consular office in Alberta now." Number two, share it to facebook.com/groups/Migrante Alberta, or to facebook.com/mig.rante.1 through their Facebook account, and or email to migrantealberta@gmail.com. And we will post this to the Radio Migrante event page tonight. Or you can also go to their website, Consular Services Campaign Alberta at wordpress.com. And Elena of Migrante Alberta, thank you so much once again for keeping on doing the tweets on Twitter. So thank you so much. So this concludes the show for Radio Migrante and CHY 105.5 FM, your leading source for diversity. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to us every Sunday. Up next is Roy Green and Lady Soul. Have a pleasant evening, everyone, and